Mike, I always ask you this question because for some reason I can't tell. Does it show that
It is,
recording?
it's recording, it's recording.
I don't know why I don't see that.
We got
Well,
the
hi,
got
everyone.
it, the thing where you have to got
Yeah.
it to.
Yeah, this is Cynthia with the North San Joaquin Valley chapter of CNPS, and this is our monthly webinar about various things about native plants. It's our 10th event. We hold them every second Monday of the month. Our speaker today is Paul Siri Wilson, who's the past president of the Bryophyte chapter, which is the CNPS's only virtual chapter, and I'm sure Paul will talk a bit about that. And he's going to teach us about Bryophytes, starting with the basics. Here's my email down here if you want to get in touch with me. Okay, so here's the agenda. So I'm going to just give you a quick overview of our series. Mike then is going to talk about our chapter and CNPS in general. I'll introduce Paul, and then Paul will give his talk. And typically the talk goes to about 8 o'clock, and then we have a half hour for questions. And Mike will mention this also, but if you have questions, just put them in the chat. And then when Paul is done, we'll give him all the questions to answer. He's also looking at the chat, so if he sees something urgent, he may respond. All of this is recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel at NSJV_CNPS. And we post in various places our upcoming events. In particular, we post them in our newsletter and on the CNPS website, at the events, cnps.org/events. You can sign up to get the notices for that. So I'm just going to briefly tell you about some of our past webinars. So the first one was about biodiversity and the native plant gardener with Arvind Kumar from the Santa Clara Valley chapter. Then we had reliable California native plants for a garden with no irrigation, the KK also from the Santa Clara Valley chapter, which is a chapter I also belong to. This talk was extremely popular, and their part 2 will be coming up shortly, and I'll mention that. Another one about native plant gardens, which is, what happened to October? Oh my God, October is missing here. Shoot, I don't know. We did have a talk in October. I'll have to find that. So in November, we had planning and growing a California native plant garden, and that was with Carl Hill of Blossom Hill Natives. Oh, I remember what it was. So the one in October was, I think it was basic structure of local wildflowers. So it was very interesting. Let me go back up here. Then we had Dr. Jean Knapp talking about various places to go right here in the Central Valley to, go look at native plants and be inspired. And Dr. Knapp is actually on the call, so we're happy to have her here. This was in February. So then February was basic botany of our favorite California wildflowers. March was on floral displays. Sorry, I have a deaf dog who's very vocal. I'll try to get her to stop. Then in April, we had vernal pools of the Central Valley. In May, we had a talk about the lowland community native plant garden. And this was not what plants did I plant, but how did I make it happen? This is a very incredible 2-acre garden here in Modesto. Last month was landscape design. So all these webinars are recorded and in our YouTube channel. So our upcoming webinars, of course, today is Bryophyte Basics. In August, we have native plants of the San Luis National Wildlife Refuge and Wildlife Benefits. So this is where the Thule elk resides. So Madeline and Nancy will come and talk about those plants and also, how they benefit the wildlife. September 11th will be the second part of reliable California native plants for garden with no irrigation. And this talk was very, very popular because who doesn't want to have a garden? You don't have to irrigate. And so that will be coming up. Then in October, we'll talk about native plants and our native fish and the interactions between those. November, we'll do creating wreaths with native plants in time for the holidays, take December off. And then in January, we'll have our own Mike Azevedo talking about cowscape. So you can sign up for all of these now. And if you request, what happened to my mouse? Oh, there it is. Whoops. If you request to be on our newsletter, you'll get the links and everything, or you can just go to cnps.org/events. So this is our YouTube channel, and these are all of our webinars are recorded and are up there. So just kind of a rehash here. So it's a free webinar series. They're all recorded, typically the second Monday evening of each month. I'm Cynthia, I'm the organizer. And if you would like to be a speaker, if you have an idea of something you would like to talk about, just send me an email. We're very open to anyone who has some level of expertise coming in and talking to us about native plants. Okay, now I'm gonna switch over to Mike. Or Mike, you want to take the screen?
Yeah, let me see if I can do that. All right, you're seeing the screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so I have actually put something into the comment section that basically the links and stuff like that I'm going to talk about. So if you're looking for a link, you might be able to find it right there in the comment section, or in the chat, I should say. So I wanted to give you an introduction to our chapter, the North San Joaquin Valley chapter of the California Native Plant Society. The California Native Plant Society is a statewide organization, and you can join it for a regular membership, individual membership of $50 to receive Flora and Artemisia magazines, get benefits such as discounts at certain nurseries, sales and such, and the ability to join 2 different chapters of CNPS. If you'd like to join North San Joaquin Valley chapter and one other, such as Santa Clara Valley chapter or the Sacramento chapter or others, whichever one just seems to speak to you, it will be an option when you go to the link on the slide, which is cnps.org/membership. And we hope you join us here in the North San Joaquin Valley chapter and whichever other chapters you feel kinship with. I said the membership was $50, but there is an option to choose other price options. And higher membership levels are available for those who are able to help this organization more financially, and it's a great cause. The regular membership link is right there, cnps.org/membership. Remember, this is the link to join up. I should point out that that long bar at the bottom labeled other is for those who want to choose another amount, one of the other, an amount that is other than what's in the little buttons up there. And notice the bottom of that barrel is actually $25. Not everybody can afford $50, but we have removed membership level titles, and that includes the low income level. If you want to join us for $25, and then you could do that. Not everyone, let's see, okay. If you want to, if you want to join for $25 with the magazines and all, but you just can't afford the $50 membership, we still want you to have the opportunity to join us. Just fill that amount, minimum of $25, and you're in. But $50 is what we consider kind of the normal amount. Now, the 4th edition of our newsletter was sent out in May. Volume 4 of the Oak Branch was sent out to all of our members via email. This was our Love on Our Pollinators edition, with articles on helping native bees, learning about our local swallowtail butterflies, and our photo page with views of some beautiful pollinators in a Manteca backyard. Cece Hurst, our president and big-time field trip leader, takes us on virtual video reels of her favorite native plant hangouts. And Rhonda Allen clues us in on some great fragrant native plants and shows us incredible photos of late spring wildflowers of the Central Foothills. And our conservation committee is finally getting off the ground with our second meeting being held via Zoom on Tuesday, July 18th at 7 p.m. If you're interested in attending, please let me know in chat. Our next newsletter comes out in August. We have a field trip coming up on Monday, August 14th. Join us for this weekday hike before we head back to school. On this family-friendly nature walk, we will explore the trails of Dry Creek Regional Park. Our guide will discuss the different native trees and shrubs as well as other wildlife we encounter. This trail is stroller friendly, and please bring water and binoculars if you have them. And yes, it is on a Monday. All of our field trips so far have been on weekends, and we received requests that some of our field trips, they'd like a couple on weekdays too. So here you go. And we have a chapter booth at the Stanislaus County Fair, which goes until July 16th. Carl Hill will be manning it this Saturday, so stop by and say hi. We will still need to build up our volunteer base, so that we'll have more people to work the booth and answer questions. If you are interested in getting more involved, let us know in chat so we can start getting more core volunteers. And this is an opportunity. I was talking to Paul, and he was telling me about a chapter meeting or a chapter event that's happening. It's actually a statewide event happening at Sioux Meg National Park in Humboldt County. Paul, do you mind letting everybody know what that's all about?
Yeah, so this is a chapter council meeting. Those happen 4 times a year, quarterly, and all members are invited. The one in September, I'm on the committee to organize, and I think it's going to be a really good one. So on Friday, I think we're going to start out with a tour of the management of Lanphier Christensen Dunes. And then there'll be a nursery tour and a tour of a restoration site. Saturday's kind of for business, but there will be a few conservation topics that are presented, and there'll be a like a dinner talk by Michael Kaufman, who just edited a book about the Klamath region. Then Sunday is still in the works, but I think it's going to be a really great compilation of talks and workshops that involve the Yurok tribe and how they've managed the land over the years and used plants. So I think that's going to be super duper. Anyway, all members are welcome to attend. You just have to register and pay for your meals. And also, I'm hoping that we can offer home, beds in people's homes if you wanted to do that. So just yeah. Anyway, that's that. That's all I have to say about it.
Well, thank you very much, because that's a kind of event that I don't normally get around to being able to tell people about. I probably should try and get more information on those statewide events and stuff like that in order to let everybody know about them.
Well, for the last few years, they've been boring. So,
well, thank you. That's a great sell job you're doing there.
We're hoping to revive the in-person part.
Well, it's been boring because it's on Zoom.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of really cool in-person stuff that you'll be able to get. They'll still have it on Zoom, I think, kind of a hybrid.
Just the business part, which you probably aren't interested in.
Right, but all the really cool stuff is in person. So yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for that. And I should point out that we intend to do everything by email. We recognize that there are some people who actually prefer US mail. For those who are inconvenienced, we do apologize, but we don't have the financial or volunteer base to put the newsletter out that way. CNPS has asked all chapters to find ways of reducing carbon, and saving all that paper is one of our contributions. If this is a true problem, let us know, but so far, no one has complained. And if you are on our list, you should have received it, but our newsletter about our newsletter, but if you somehow got missed, let me know in chat. And to be put on our list, I'll just let me know there. We want our newsletter to get out to everyone. That's our mission, to promote native plants around our region. And our best way of doing that is to keep everybody thinking about native plants, to keep them on everyone's mind through events and presentations and gardening. So we want to keep those of you who haven't joined the statewide organization in the loop, so that perhaps you can join us for an event or two, and to remind you that we are here. And why care about native plants? We're finding out more and more each day about the true need to restore our environment as much as we can. The man who has been trying to explain the need for native plants with the most eloquence is Doug Ptolemy, a professor from Delaware. He's written 3 books on the subject, I think maybe even 4, all of which circle around the theme that we have been damaging the environment dramatically, but there is hope in native plants. 95% of all birds feed insects to their young. Caterpillars are an important component of that diet, and caterpillars cannot live on non-native plants, certainly with few exceptions. Native plants are critical to the ecosystem, and a backyard with no native plants, and that is a devastatingly high percentage of them, are ecological dead zones. Planting native plants in our yards helps moths, butterflies, native bees, and other pollinators, and therefore birds, and the web goes on and on. Our cities need not to be devoid of butterflies and moths and native bees. For more information on this, you can watch a 1-hour video that knocked me over like a brick. This was a talk sponsored by local Audubon chapters just this past January with Douglas Ptolemy. The link is in the chat. So with that, if you have any questions during Jim's presentation, please add them to chat. We'll be doing questions at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Cynthia, and I'll be in chat for those with questions or comments or requests to be on our email list.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So I'm just going to give a quick intro of Paul Wilson. He's retired from the biology faculty of Cal State Northridge, and his students did ecological work on bryophytes in several climatic elevation zones in the Sierra and Southern California over the last 2 decades. He also did research on floral evolution. He's a past president of the Bryophyte Chapter of CNPS. And as I mentioned earlier, the Bryophyte chapter is very unique to CNPS because it's a virtual chapter, not a geographically based chapter. Because it's a Bryophytes cover the whole state, and anyway, they all got together and created this virtual chapter. So that is one of the chapters when you sign up to become a member of CNPS, and you get to choose 2 chapters. You can choose Bryophytes as one of them. All right, now, Paul, I'm going to give it to you. You want to take the screen, please?
Yeah, this might take a minute. Yeah, you can get to the Bryophyte chapter by looking at the website. It's Bryophyte, no S at the end, .cnps.org. And from there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and you should be able to continue from with that. All right, let's see. Start share, yes. And then I just go to my thing, and there we are. Okay, so probably a good time for you guys to mute your microphones, and I'll just sort of plow through some stuff, put questions in the chat, and we'll deal with those at the end. So this is a basic introduction to bryophytes, and we'll just start with, like, what is a bryophyte? It's a kind of strange grouping, maybe, but they're cute little plants that have a great deal of organization, and they collect sunlight and turn it into more plant. Here's the way I think about it. We have the land plants, and the land plants are a branch on the tree of life. There's 4 lineages of land plants. The vascular plants, that's what's covered in the Jepson Manual. Then hornworts, mosses, and liverworts, and those are the bryophytes. So the bryophytes are hornworts, mosses, and liverworts. They might be related in this way, that is not a whole branch on the tree of life, but just sort of the leftovers of what's not a vascular plant. Or they might be related in this way, where they are a branch on the tree of life and vascular plants branched off first. And that's still under quite a bit of, well, data. Some data indicate both possible solutions. Okay, so let's go through each of the three groups. First, there's liverworts, and maybe there's 7,000 species worldwide. And these encompass very disparate morphologies. So some are complex thallus liverworts. This one's a simple thallus liverwort, and then there are leafy liverworts. And I'll show pictures of all of those. But anyway, they're very, very different plants that are all come under the umbrella of liverwort. And then there's mosses, and there's a lot of mosses. You know, like there's more mosses than probably all of ferns and gymnosperms put together, maybe about 14,000 species worldwide. And that's probably the plant that you most associate with bryophytes. But, you know, there's also liverworts. And then hornworts are not a very big group. There's maybe 150 species that will be recognized when the dust settles. And they're called hornworts because the sporophyte part, that part that's sticking up there, let's see if I can do this. Yeah, see that sticking up is looks like a horn or something like that. It's called a sporophyte because it makes spores, whereas the plant at the bottom here is the gametophyte, and it makes gametes, that is eggs or sperm or both. And then the fourth group of the land plants is the vascular plants. So these are not bryophytes. They're ferns, seed plants, etc. They constitute just one of the four lineages. So they also have gametophytes and sporophytes. So like for a fern here, you can see here's a gametophyte, and then here's a young sporophyte growing off of the gametophyte. And if it's very successful, it'll eventually be able to grow up into a nice big fern like this. So let's start a little table comparing bryophytes to vascular plants. Vascular plants have vascular tissue, and it's quite elaborate, at least it can be unless it's been reduced quite a bit. And that includes lignin, the thing that hardens vascular tissue that makes wood hard. Bryophytes have minimal vascular tissue, not none, but they don't have lignin, so their vascular tissue is not hard, and most bryophytes don't have much vascular tissue. In bryophytes, the sporophyte, the part that makes spores, it lives out its entire life on the gametophyte, almost like a parasite on its mom. Whereas in vascular plants, the sporophyte is dominant and it grows off of the gametophyte and takes on a life of its own. So there's some pretty big biological differences between vascular plants and the other land plants. And we can keep on building this table out. Let's go to those life cycles. So we'll start with life cycle of a moss. And I like to start with the spores. So these spores are dispersed on the wind, and they fly all over the place. They're very hard to kill. They're, you know, you could consider them almost immortal. Anyway, if one's lucky, it lands in a place that's appropriate for that species and it grows out, and it might make a gametophyte, in this case, that's either female or gametophyte that's male. That varies from species to species. You can have other species that have both male and female organs on the same plant. And here are those organs, the female organs, the male organs. Eventually the male organs make sperm, and that sperm is released by some magical response to the environment after it's re-wetted. and it'll be attracted to an egg. It can kind of smell the egg, and it'll go and fertilize that egg. And then once you have a fertilized egg, then you have 2 sets of chromosomes, and you're back to the sporophyte stage. This grows and grows and grows. Eventually, it makes a capsule, and then inside the capsule, spores are made, and that reduces the number of chromosomes back down to 1 set of chromosomes. So you have 2 sets of chromosomes in the lower part and 1 set of chromosomes in the upper part, which is a lot like humans, except for the fact that in humans, eggs and sperm are not multicellular things. All right. Now let's contrast that to a fern. So this is a common fern that you probably know, sword fern. And again, the spores disperse. And if they land in a place that's appropriate for that species, they grow into a gametophyte. So far it's about the same. That gametophyte then makes eggs and or sperm, and that depends on the species. Again, the sperm are released from the male organ in response to environmental cues, and they smell the egg, they go to it, fertilize it, and then that restores 2 sets of chromosomes. This grows and grows and grows and makes a sporophyte. So the big difference is this sporophyte continues to grow. It uses up the mother gametophyte, and it becomes a great big plant, a huge plant that has water conducting cells and sugar conducting cells. It has roots that can absorb nutrients. It has an epidermis that resists drying out, and so on. So now I can build out my table a little bit more, and I could say, well, they differ in mosses have minimal vasculature. They're small. And then almost all bryophytes are pulciohydric to some degree. That means that they use the hydration of their immediate environment. They don't try very hard anyway to retain water. Whereas most vascular plants, they have all sorts of fancy anatomical adaptations and even behaviors to be wet inside. A cactus in the middle of summer in the Mojave Desert is still wet inside. It's very, very good at not letting that water get out of its body. Whereas the mosses in the Mojave Desert at the same time are completely dry. They're just sleeping it off, waiting for something to happen. And now associated with this pulciohydry is that bryophytes are generally drought tolerant, and most of them recover amazingly well and quickly upon re-wetting. So people have taken bryophytes out of museums, added water, and they're back to a positive photosynthetic rate in minutes, maybe an hour, after being dry for more than a year. Very few vascular plants can do that, and they're kind of in special groups. And then it also takes them a long time to repair themselves usually. So that's a big difference in the biology of the 3 bryophyte groups compared to the vascular plants. Also, we might think about how these plants get their ionic nutrients. So vascular plants, typically, they get their ionic nutrients through root hairs and mycorrhizal relationships. And that's, kind of where all the action is. It's not very effective to put nitrate and phosphate on the leaves of a vascular plant. Maybe a little bit would get in, but not much. Whereas for bryophytes, the whole plant is biologically active. there's very little in the way of a waxy protective surface that would keep nutrients out. So any living cell has access to the nutrients that fall upon it. Another thing that's maybe a little bit harder to pin down, but I think of bryophytes as having the niche more or less all in one place. You can pretty much see it. Whereas the niche of a vascular plant, a lot of it's underground, you can't see it. And a lot of it has to do with early stages of life as well. I think much less so for bryophytes. And then finally, asexual reproduction is very common in bryophytes. You know, you can pretty much take a bryophyte and throw it in a coffee grinder, and the fragments you can grow into new bryophyte if you can get it in anything like the right environment for the growth of that species. And that's not generally true of vascular plants. Yes, there's some asexual reproduction, but they're usually pretty complicated structures that are themselves little plants. Okay, so that's that. So let's reiterate some of these points. First, bryophytes tend to be small, and there are exceptions. So the image there on the right, on the passenger side, that's some bryophyte. That's a big bryophyte. That's Dawsonia. It's probably about the biggest, coarsest, stiffest bryophyte around. Whereas a lot of species are more like the one on the left. Then we might also say that as a consequence of being small, if their substrate dries out, they also dry out. And that's another way of sort of thinking of them as being polkiohydric, that they follow the hydration of their immediate environment. Here's a picture of Heucheria, which grows in the redwood forest in Humboldt County and all the way up to Alaska along the coast. And you can see those cells just glistening there, like anything that washes over them, they're going to be able to grab. In our environment, the way I think of it is there's lots of nutrients that kind of accumulate through the summer. And then you have the first rains in the fall. And if it weren't for bryophytes, all that stuff would just go into the streams and then kind of out to sea. But instead, they wash over bryophytes and also over lichens and other such organisms. And the bryophytes grab those nutrients, incorporate them into their bodies, and then only release them very gradually. And so that's, you know, pretty different than your standard spruce that's connected to a fungus underground. All right, I'm going to take a little detour here to give you just some vocabulary and anatomy. Here's something about the parts of a moss. The bit on the top of a capsule there called the calyptra, it's like a hood. That's actually part of the gametophyte. That's part of the green leafy part. It's the outer part of the female organ that's then grown to kind of like nourish the young sporophyte. And maybe kind of interact with it hormonally too. We don't know a whole lot about it, but that's part of the gametophyte. And then underneath that, there's a capsule, and the capsule is on top of a stalk or seta. And this is pretty different than liverworts. Liverworts have a seta also, but it's very flimsy, and it just fills up with water for long enough to shed the spores. And then it withers. Whereas the seed of a moss is maybe the sturdiest part of the whole plant, or nearly anyway. Okay, so we get rid of the cap, so we get rid of the calyptra, and then under that there's a lid of the capsule called the operculum. And when that pops off, it reveals the teeth around the mouth called the peristome. And here's some pictures of peristomes of some local plants. Uh-oh, what did I do? Okay, let's do this. Peristomes of some local plants. And see, they're very fancy structures. These disperse the spores. They're often affected by how very minute changes in humidity that make them move and pull spores out and release them into the air. Here's another distinction that's helpful. The primitive condition in mosses is to be acrocarpous. That means that the sporophyte is born at the tip of the main branch, and it uses up that main branch. And so acrocarpous mosses tend not to be like feather mosses or anything like that. Whereas there's a great big species-rich group called pleurocarps, and those pleurocarps have sporophytes that are on short side branches, short specialized side branches. And so pleurocarps tend to be very highly branched and regularly branched. So your feather moss, typical feather moss is a pleurocarp. And these are mosses that radiated kind of in the shadow of angiosperms during the Cretaceous, back in the time of the dinosaurs, the latter days of the dinosaurs. Okay, so now, a little bit about a moss. Let's talk about what a liverwort looks like. And we kind of have to do this for each of several groups of liverworts. So liverworts were originally named after complex thallus liverworts. And what does a complex thallus liverwort look like? Well, maybe it looks a little bit like a liver. So here's conchocephalum, and it's got this kind of alligator skin look. And in each one of those hexagons, there's a little air pore that lets air in, and there's photosynthetic filaments. So it looks a little bit like a vascular plant, mesophyll, although, not nearly as well developed, and no true stomata. So that's a complex thallus liverwort. And then here's a simple thallus liverwort. The sporophyte includes the capsule, which is the black balls, and then a watery stalk that doesn't last for very long. That's our most common simple thallus liverwort, or it would be in your area anyway. It'd be growing on the soil all around your area. And then there's leafy liverworts. Leafy liverworts is where most of the species are worldwide. And generally the leaves appear to be 2-ranked or 3-ranked. And generally the sporophyte breaks open into 4 longitudinal sections to release the spores. So worldwide, there's lots of leafy liverworts. In California, we have leafy liverworts, but most of them are along the humid coast or at the tops of the mountains, like the peninsula, the Sky Peninsula of the Sierra Nevada. California's and other Mediterranean climates are really known for their complex thallus liverworts. And so we have lots of complex thallus liverworts, and they tend to be low down in the places that really dry out during the summer months. Oh yeah, there's also a 4th group, and you might see this plant. This is Spherocarpus, makes these little spheres. And let's see if I can get the thing back. This is a female plant, whereas this is a male plant. And the little blisters are where the sperm comes out. You can find this in lots of like agricultural fields that were disturbed in the fall, and then you find them in the spring. And then all sorts of natural habitats too on soil. Okay, where do bryophytes grow? Well, they grow on all sorts of substrates. They grow on rocks, they grow on soil, they grow on trees. And then this Fontinalis antipyretica, that grows in streams. So you can have things that grow in wet places, in dry places, all sorts of different substrates. Asexual reproduction is common in bryophytes. A lot of that's just pieces breaking off. It's nothing specialized, but there are some species that have specialized structures for asexual reproduction. This is one that grows in the redwood forest, and then also in the coniferous forests at mid-elevation in the Sierra Nevada, like the giant sequoia forests. It has these little pom-poms at the top of granular things that are, much larger than spores, but still quite small and can function to spread the plant around, grow new plant. And then here's another one where the leaf tips break off on the left, and on the right, there's a liverwort that has little pom-poms too. Now, another interesting thing about the biology of these organisms is that there's some group of plants that we'll say is exemplified by mosses that tend to be able to move around a lot, and they tend to have large geographic ranges. So there's not lots of species that are just separated by geography. The species are separated by their niches, and it's very common to have species of this sort that have ranges that include multiple continents. Whereas seed plants, typically, you don't have the same species on multiple continents. And you have lots of examples where there's loads of species in, say, California in different regions. And I liken this to the difference between birds and salamanders. So birds fly around, and they can have large geographic ranges. And when they don't, it's usually because they're specialized to a particular niche. Whereas salamanders tend to have a bunch of geographically separated species that are small like that, small geographic ranges. It's not just mosses though. I think that it includes ferns, your typical fern, and liverworts and hornworts, that they all have tiny spores that can fly on the wind and that live for a long time, despite a lot of environmental insult. And so the exceptions kind of prove the rule, I think, and maybe we'll get into some of those in a bit here. How about aliens? Well, if everything could get everywhere, then I'm not sure we would have to worry much about invasive aliens. But here's a plant that's an alien. It's from the Southern Hemisphere, and when I was a boy, it was very strange to find it. You'd only find it in human disturbed habitats. And now it's one of the most abundant plants in coastal Humboldt County and Mendocino County. Its sporophytes are born down deep in the gametophyte, and they don't blow around in the wind. So I think it's a little bit of an exception that proves the rule. And there definitely are some invasive alien bryophytes, but much less so than seed plants. A couple things that we might note before we get on to other topics. First, here's a couple of kinds of organisms that are not bryophytes. So first there's Selaginella, and you might mistake this for a bryophyte. Lots of people have, and there's no shame in doing so. Selaginella is a vascular plant. It's in a group that you might not otherwise know about, called the Lycophytes. And Selaginella has great big female spores, almost like seeds, and it has geographic ranges that are more like seed plants. In other words, it's a whole bunch of species. They're mostly non-overlapping in their geographic range and separated by geography. Selaginella is also quite desiccation tolerant, although it takes a while to come back to life after it's moistened. And then there's lichens. Lichens are a completely different kind of organism, but they do have very similar water relations to bryophytes, and they often grow together. And if you're a very, very good naturalist, you could learn both bryophytes and lichens, and you would be able to do a lot of great ecology if you could do that. But my brain's too small to really learn lichens. A lichen is the structural part is usually an ascomycete. The photosynthetic part is usually a green algae. And then kind of recently, it's been found that there's a third member too that's often the yeast. So it's kind of cool. And maybe if we were going to have another chapter, it would be a lichen chapter. Okay, and then green algae are also, they're not land plants, they're just scum, pond scum. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore. But some people kind of refer to these as moss, which is insulting. Okay, how are we doing on time anyway? To look at the time. Oh no, stop. Okay, I'll just not worry about the time. I wanted to end by telling you a little bit about some research that I and Lena Coleman have been doing for the last decade. Here's a picture of Lena. And the way I'd like to pitch this is that we all think of bryophytes as loving wet places. And I think this is often turned into something that's kind of a misconception. So I think to the general botanist, it's sort of surprising to find out that there are more bryophyte species and probably more bryophyte biomass even down in the dry, hot foothills than up on the tops of the mountains. And this is because we are too keyed into thinking about the vascular plants. Like the vascular plants, yes, they have to endure somehow the dry summer. But for bryophytes, they just sleep through the dry summer. So summer's not really a problem, and the foothills are foggy all winter. So it's a great place to live. Whereas high in the mountains, it's still pretty dry in the summer and it's under snow during the winter. So unless you're in a wet place, a wet little micro spot, it's kind of a bad place to live. So that's really basically the story, but I wanted to show you some data, show off some data about this that we've collected. At the top graph on the top left there, you have number of species, and it's corrected for something, but don't worry about the correction. It's basically number of species and then elevation. So there's a lot of scatter, but there's maybe 5 fewer species at the top of the Sierra than in the foothills for a plot that's 25 square meters. If you look at it carefully, here's a p-value. And so elevation is, kind of a big predictor of species richness. Also wetness is, and not surprisingly, the wetter you go, the more species you have. But for elevation, the higher you go, the fewer species you have. You can look at the same thing, same data as two cumulative curves, and the gray curve here is just the accumulation of plots as we went up the mountain, our sampling effort, whereas the S is the accumulation of species, and you can see they're separated a little bit. So here's some species that we can point out. The lower one there is Chloridium subulatum, and that grows all over in your chapter. It's a little teeny plant that hardly puts its capsule up on a stalk, and you could think of it as kind of like a winter annual. And then at mid elevations, here's a species that grows in wet meadows that have some snow, but kind of mid elevations. And then at the highest elevations, there's another species, Straminium, that also grows in pretty wet places like along the edge of tarns. Now, if we delve into these data a little bit more, there's some take-home messages that you probably won't be able to get just by looking at the graph for a minute, but I've stared at these graphs for hours and hours. And what I've kind of concluded is that the effect is greatest for the driest of spots. Wetness 0, that's like places that are out in the sun on rock. It dries out in hours after a rain. And then this effect, the difference between the two curves, it kind of diminishes as you get to wetter and wetter spots, so that when you get to a place that is like a seasonal seep or something like that, there's hardly any difference at all between what you'd expect to find based on the plots, based on the sampling, and what you find based on the occupancy by the bryophytes. So anyway, take home message is that dry spots are what's really responsible for this increase in the species richness at low elevations. You can also look at the different substrates, and what we find is that the soil substrate is a big contributor to the disparity. That is, at low elevations, there's lots and lots of bryophytes that are growing on the soil, whereas once you go up high, there's not nearly as many bryophytes that grow on the soil. Most of them are big-bodied things that can handle frost heave. So that's an effect. Also on the rocks, there's a bit more of an effect. This is an interesting plant, this alawina. If you can see that the edge of the leaf's kind of curled over, and then on the top of the leaf, there's these little filaments. So it resists drying out just a little bit. And this is a fun plant that you would see in kind of compacted soil, maybe with a kind of high pH, maybe not right in the valley, but just a little bit out of the valley. I can go back to, this is another fun plant. That's Gremmia levigata, grows on hard rock surfaces, right on the top of the rock in sunny spots. And you can see it by these white hair tips. They're very extreme. Okay, well, I think I'll stop there and see what's in the comments.
Yeah, I've been kind of keeping track, which has, of course, been meaning that my head was buried in there. So I have a couple of questions, but I'm not sure if you actually went over them. First of all, Jennifer, way back when, mentioned that she noticed that there wasn't a lot about bryophytes on platforms like iNaturalist. She says general biology. And do you have a comment on that?
Yes, that's true. Also, a lot of the stuff that's on iNaturalist about bryophytes is not super reliable because I put it up. And then another person in our chapter also put up some not super reliable stuff. I mean, I think we just need, kind of more vigorous public outreach. Maybe now that I'm retired, I could correct my mistakes. But yes, it's definitely true that we're not keeping up with the.
Well, it's not entirely your fault. I mean, there's a lot of them, as you just mentioned, and obviously, too many people are ignoring them. I mean, so to me, I see moss and I think, oh, look, moss. I don't think about species or anything like that. So
yeah, but just like look at this end shot here. I mean, those things are pretty distinctive. I think
no,
we could do a pretty good job at that. But we just take some people really pouring their soul into it.
It's called the lack of observational skills. And then Tora was interested in the Hurok talk. Now, Judy pointed out that there really isn't much to say yet on.
No, you have to follow it. Yeah,
on that. And so what I will say about this is that I will see if I can get information on it into either the August newsletter. The August newsletter or the September monthly email about it, so that people can get involved.
Yeah, I feel like those things are not going to quite work. I think people need to contact their delegate and get it from their delegate. So
well, we have one of those. So
because the delegates and the presidents will be told everything as soon as it's known.
Right.
And so,
the rest of us are left in the dark. See, that's the problem. So
yeah, but anyway,
we're still
working with the tribe to figure out exactly what it's going to be. But the chapter delegates and presidents will be told right away. So if people can contact their chapter delegates and presidents, and the president or the delegate can keep a list of those emails and then forward it to them, that would be the easiest way. The next most easiest way would be contact me, and I will endeavor to keep such a list too.
Well, maybe I can do that and see if there's anything that I can put in the newsletter when it comes up at the end of this month.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. And then Noam says, my understanding was that bryophytes are now basically accepted to be monophyletic, and then he or she brings the receipts. And
yeah, you want me to address that?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you just sequence all the DNA you can possibly get, then you try to figure out the evolutionary tree based on that. Then you find that liverworts, hornworts, and mosses form a whole and complete branch on the tree of life. However, this is sort of like throwing all of the data, no matter what quality, at the problem. It's a known pitfall that if you're dealing with something that's an ancient divergence, and you put in rapidly evolving genes, then those genes are going to converge on one another. And so they will tend to give you the wrong answer, which doesn't mean that it is the wrong answer when you find it. It's just, you don't want to be too cocky about it. So if you look at the parts of the genome that is very slowly evolving, and that is very highly conserved, then you might be able to find an innovation that led to each group, and those innovations together could indicate the branching pattern. So that's sort of where it stands, where if you look at all the data, it's monophyletic, and if you selectively look at the best data, it's not. And so, I guess I'm waiting before I start teaching people that the bryophytes are monophyletic.
And then Amy, at some point, I don't know if this was specific to the time that you were talking, but she said macro algae and then seaweeds. I think she was trying to say that they were equivalent. Does that sound right?
Yeah, well, macroalgae and seaweeds are the same thing. But so so we're talking here about various groups of plants, that is various groups of things that photosynthesize that have a large complex body. And that includes brown algae like kelp, red algae, and then various groups of green algae. The green algae are the closest relatives to the land plants. So you could recognize a group that's like green plants, which is green algae plus land plants. And some of those have very complex, well-organized macroscopic structure. A great number of them also, or a great part of the ecologically important ones also don't, that they're more or less single-celled. And then there's a whole bunch of other groups that are also more or less single-celled as well. Anyway, it's a super interesting thing to think about the various groups that have taken on a complex, organized, multicellular body and how that is coordinated. But anyway, that's a topic for another talk.
No,
by someone else.
Cynthia asks, what eats bryophytes?
Typically not the same things that are eating vascular plants. So vascular plants, you think about caterpillars and a bunch of beetles and this, that, and the other thing. They're kind of often specialized to overcome the chemical defenses of the host plants that they're on. Now, bryophytes are pretty heterogeneous, so there might be some of that going on with liverworts. Mosses, their defenses are typically not that they have specialized chemicals that certain animals are able to overcome. They have kind of a general inaccessibility of nutrients. They're not very easily digested. There are organisms that live in them and on them, but they typically are not the same groups. They're not like caterpillars and beetles. They're more like nematodes and rotifers and these things called water bears, which also live on lichens.
Sounds like there's a whole world we know nothing about.
Yeah, I mean, we know some about it, but yeah, it's hard to get much farther than these things might be eating mosses. You can sometimes find like galls on mosses that are caused by a nematode, because there's a nematode inside of them. The nematodes eat everything, right? It's different nematodes eat different things, and there seems like there's a nematode that eats almost anything.
Samuel asks, are there any bryophytes that are popular in home gardens?
Yes, but you have to have a climate where it works. And then you have to use the bryophyte that kind of matches with your garden. So this is kind of a thing in Japan and Korea. It's pretty hard in most of California to really cultivate your bryophytes. You'd probably be kind of happier just making a good habitat where the bryophytes that are already there are not covered up by leaf litter and so on. Then the other thing is people have terraria that they grow bryophytes in, and there you can grow things that are pretty different than what would grow in California and drier parts of California, because the bryophytes can just, they can stay humid in the terrarium forever. The key to growing bryophytes is don't let them be hot and wet at the same time. Like if it's hot and they're totally dry, they'll make it through. And if it's cool, then that's the time to wet them. But if you start putting the sprinkler on when it's 100 degrees, it's a sure way to kill your bryophytes.
Wow. No mask, do bryophytes have differences in cell walls that help them come back from desiccation?
Cell walls. I think the answer is no. The cell wall is basically dead. So it's the cell membranes that are helping them come back from desiccation. And they do have these amazing like stress proteins that are able to rebuild the cell membrane from what we would think of as complete desiccation. In the cell walls, though, there is pectin, and pectin holds onto water, but I think that's kind of to keep them from drying out quite as quickly as they otherwise would. Yeah, I guess that's as much as I need to say.
Jennifer is saying, oh goodness, I was just noticing the students wanted to find specific IDs for what we were finding along the trail at Calaveras big trees. I'm not sure if there's anything to add to that.
Well, maybe not. There's not like a good guide or anything, but I do have this thing that I'm sort of making. If I could find it. Let's see if this works. You could ask another question while it's loading.
Okay. Judy said, ask your chapter delegate or president to let you know when it's posted. I think that she's talking about the HUROC thing.
Yeah, chapter council.
And then,
so
right.
Yeah. And it'll be spelled with a Y, HUROC.
Right. Yeah. And then Amy said, just a comment about green algae was mentioned as pond scum can also be considered seaweed.
Well, probably not the pond scum part, but there's a lot of different green algae. So the closest green algae to land plants that you're likely to know is a freshwater thing. You often find it in the places where cows drink, like the troughs where they drink, and it's called Cara, and it's quite well organized.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Jennifer, her first question was about platforms like iNaturalist, but I wanted to ask about Calscape. Are bryophytes represented on Calscape? And if not, is there any chance that they may eventually get on Calscape?
I don't think so. Isn't Calscape like more for landscaping?
It's for native plants all across California. Are bryophytes are considered plants?
Yes, but they're not very good for landscaping, at least not in California.
Well, that's true. Okay. I could see how that wouldn't. That would be a reason why it might not be quite so.
Yeah, I mean, you
valid.
might do right.
Well, that answers that question, I guess. And then, how many bryophyte species are there in California or the U.S.?
I used to know these numbers. I think there's around 1,000 bryophytes in California. I might be off by a few hundred. Yeah.
And how many different species of mosses are there?
There's around 14,000 species of mosses worldwide.
Wow.
In California, there would probably be maybe 700.
That's incredible. Just, I mean, I know that you can get down there, really close and start looking at the stuff way down deep, but it's still hard to believe that there are 700 different kinds of mosses.
Yeah, it's good to start learning the genera rather than the species. the genera often kind of speak to you as obviously different. And then there are a few genera that are really difficult in California.
And then,
because of a lot of
yeah, oh,
species.
sorry. And then, are bryophytes at risk due to overdevelopment or things like that?
Oh yeah, certain bryophytes are, sure. Like there's a very distinctive liverwort. You know the liverwort I showed you? Well, that's kind of an annual. But then there's a perennial that's its own genus. And it only grows in a few places around San Diego and probably adjacent Baja. And they'd be, you know, perfect places to build houses. So that would be a very good candidate for, you know, like an endangered species, because it's distinctive at the genus level. There's only one species in the genus. It's under obvious threat of development, has a very small geographic range. Anyway, and if you go to the CNPS website, you can see all of the species that are in the inventory as California natives that are at least should be watched, I guess.
Okay. And then Susan is asking, what kind of loop do you use?
I've tried a lot of different types. A 10X is fine. A 16X, I've used a lot. Yeah. So if you really want to get into identifying bryophytes, then you have to take samples home and use microscopes. Like a lot of the keys would use microscope characters, compound microscope characters. After a while, you can get used to knowing all the species in your zone. You know, like it wouldn't be too hard to learn all the species in the foothills. But you'd have to have somebody show you them probably. That is, you could learn them without having to use a microscope, anything more than a hand lens.
And Tor says he's interested, or she, I'm sorry, is interested to learn more about alien mosses. Did you say that they are found in Mendocino? And where can they learn more?
So I'm from Mendocino County, and then I've also lived in Humboldt County and lived here now. And when I was a boy, Campylobus intraflexus was, I guess, hadn't invaded yet, and now it is fully invaded. So it's a clear example of an invasive alien moss. We could come up with a few other examples, but not as much as, you know, like the alien grasses that invaded.
Well, I think we just answered Sarah's question. Is there such a thing as invasive bryophytes?
Yeah, there is, but, you know, not as many. And that's probably because most of them got here before people did.
Okay. Well, Cynthia has stepped away. So at least until we're ready to. Well, she just wasn't feeling all that well. So Tor is saying I'm up in Jackson State demo forest.
It'll be there. Yeah.
All right. Cool.
If you find some bare soil, it's, you know, like that's you know, definitely you'll find it there. So this thing that I pulled up is you know, it's definitely a work in progress, and I've hardly worked on it since I retired. But there's a kind of grid of different habitats where you might find bryophytes, and if you click on one of them, it gives you a whole bunch of species that live in that habitat. And I don't know. It seemed like a fun project for students to work on, but since I don't have any students anymore, you know, then you can click on each one and it gives you a little blurb about them and stuff like that. And then you can go backwards. Anyway, this is this is like a project looking for somebody to love it.
Is there a good place in our area, so that would be Merced, San Joaquin, Stanislaus, where you would really be able to go for kind of a really great place to study, to look at bryophytes, the different kinds?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but probably. So what I've done for a lot of chapters is somebody's put me up or something, and I've come and visited for a few days and taken some pictures and made a handout that goes with a specific trail. So some of those handouts are on bryophyte.cnps.org. And you can go to that trail with the handout and, you know, see a dozen or so species and try to find them on that specific trail. So I don't, there's not such a trail in your chapter, but there could be. It could be made. It could make it such a guided trail.
Cool. Debbie says that guide would be great, and Carrie says, ask if this is available online.
Yeah, some of them are available online. Let's see here. So if you just go to, we're redoing the website, so it's currently won't look like that. It won't look like the way it looks currently. But if you go to resources, and then I think beginners, and then trail guides, then there's a few of them. And those are to particular trails. So I don't really know what your chapter encompasses, but there's a river that flows through Modesto. So, you know, there's probably a trail along that river. And I would think that a trail guide could be made for it. Would just require somebody doing it.
Is there a better time of year to look at bryophytes? I mean, are they more visible in the winter?
Yeah, kind of yes and no. I mean, they're there all year, but I wouldn't want to go out there right now because they'd just be dusty and dry. So, you know, I think the best time is usually like spring break, the end of March and the beginning of April. That's usually when we would drive up to your latitude and then do a little transect around over from San Luis Reservoir to what's the name of Mildred Lake? Is that the lake that's about your level?
I've never heard of Mildred Lake, but but
okay,
I would,
well, anyway, whatever. So yes,
one thing I could tell you is that Cece did a hike that was pretty much looking mainly for mushrooms and other funguses and stuff. And I just thought it would be cool to do a field trip that was looking for bryophytes.
Right. Yeah. And I guess I would recommend the end of March or beginning of April. I mean, usually we're trying to avoid other field trips that are eager to see flowers. So you usually can push the bryophytes a little earlier when most of the flowers are out, when most of the flowers are out. Yeah.
And then Carrie is clarifying, she said that she meant the guide with the photos and the blue blocks by habitat. Is that available online?
Oh, no, but if you want it, I can send it. I can send the current one to you if you just email me. Did
you post your email up at the top, at the front? Or do you
no,
want to just enter in the chat? Or do you want to,
sure.
What's the best way to get them the email?
There.
All right, there you go.
Yeah.
And then
to use the blue block thing, it's a PDF. So you just need a device that I guess you need a device that you can tap on. Yeah. Which could be a computer, but a tablet would be better. Yeah.
I think Marianne is asking if you could share it with everybody registered for the talk, but I mean, is that good enough? Putting it in this.
No.
All right, no problem. But for those people that are still here, at least it's there.
Yeah.
Good deal. All right. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate everybody for coming. And let's see. I wonder if I can actually stop recording.
Well, I can stop my broadcasting anyway.
Hey, Mike, this is Cynthia.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, everyone. So is there any last questions before we end?
Everybody's saying great talk and thank you and all that stuff.
Thank you so much. Paul, this is incredibly interesting and very unique.
Yeah, well, my pleasure. Hopefully we'll be able to meet in person someday, someplace. Yeah,
that'd be great. So the talk has been recorded and it will be up on our channel in a few days, maybe a week or so. So everybody can go watch it again in case you missed some of the key points. All right, so I'm going to turn off the recording, but you can
go
stay.
ahead.
You can stay here if you guys want to.
Yeah, I'll stay as long as people want me to.
And,
I'm glad you spotlighted him because I don't know if was it somebody at the very beginning was suggesting that they said they couldn't see Paul.
Mike, did you turn off the recording?
I think it's still
going. It's still going. I don't actually know how to stop the recording. Let me see. It says, oh, I can record on this computer. Yeah, I think if you start it, I think you're the one who has to stop it.
Yeah, I know. For some reason, I'm having trouble finding the button to do that.
Yeah.
But that's okay. You guys just keep talking. I'll figure it out.
Because I know.
Stop it because he's a co-host.
It's weird because I'm looking and I see report on this computer, but I don't see.
Oh,
and I saw
I saw
the. Yeah, I hear you.
Mike,
go ahead, stop it.
I found it. Okay, so now I'm stopping it. Okay, we're done.